What is the hardest language in the world? It's Korean. I really like this question because it's trying to put a number and an exact order to something that's extremely personal and extremely relative. I'm sure this question is in the back of a lot of learners' minds when they're deciding what language they want to learn, and it's probably in the front of many people's minds when they completely throw out some language for being too difficult for them. So let's look at this question very carefully to answer it in a way that fits most people, not what one of those top 10 channels says. So in my experience, I am a native English speaker. At home, Bulgarian and Russian are heritage languages, so the internal logic of the language is not that confusing for me. The way people express themselves, I think I can understand. Then in high school, I had the choice between Spanish and French, and I went with French. But as you can see, these are all European languages that have influenced each other. Mostly it's in one direction from the west to the east, but still, the internal language is similar. Maybe 3,000, 4,000 years ago, they were all one language, and they are neighbors, so they even influence each other after they have diverged. Then, in high school, for fun, I wanted to self-study Korean because I suddenly just wanted to learn Korean, so I had a push to learn something that is completely disconnected from those other languages. Of course, there's a few loans from English, mostly English, maybe a little French, but mostly English in the Korean language, but still, functionally, that language works very different. Things that I didn't consider when I had learned European languages, I did have to consider when I was learning Korean. The word order was different. I had to learn how words were built. Then I had to consider something so basic as the categorization of conjunctions. I think if you learn a lot of European languages, you take for granted that when you use and in one European language, for the most part, there's going to be an exact translation in the other language, but not for Korean. When I would say and in English, there was a few choices for me depending on the circumstance, whether I'm connecting noun and noun, or whether I'm connecting sentence and sentence, whether that and has a contrastive meaning, or it has some kind of conclusion to it. When I was learning Korean, I even had to consider which pronoun to use for I. That does not work in any European language where I changes depending on who you're speaking to. I had to consider if I had respect toward the subject of the sentence. Not just you, not the listener, the subject of the verb. So basically, when I learned Korean, I had to think of a lot of different concepts that I'd never considered before. So from my perspective, it was extremely difficult. The learning curve was really, really high, and I had to put a lot of effort understanding these really basic concepts. Effort I did need to put in when I was learning French, because for the most part, you can literally translate things in English into French, and they'll probably work. But that's not to say Asian languages are inherently difficult, because in university, when I took a Japanese class, it was extremely easy to me, because essentially the structure was the same as Korean. We were spending so much time talking about conjunctions. We spend so much time talking about if you respect the subject. But from my perspective, that was easy. I already learned that like 2-3 years ago. This is easy stuff. And on top of that, there's some vocab that transfers over. For example, in Korean, I spent so much time learning this difficult word that sounds nothing like I've ever heard before. I had to learn the word 교과서. It doesn't sound anything like what I heard before. But then I went to Japanese class and I use a 교과서. So, okay, I don't need to study that one that hard because it sounds exactly like what I learned before. So basically, as you learn more languages, the languages related to that one become easier for you. So it's impossible to say which language is the hardest. For me, Korean was hardest first. For other people, Japanese was hardest first. So it's really hard to say that some languages are inherently hard, because it really depends on where you're coming from. In general, you can say some things lead to people thinking that a language is hard. For example, the languages you know really make a difference. If you've only learned European languages and suddenly you learn Arabic, that's gonna be a big difference for you. If you only know Asian languages and you try to learn Spanish, that'll be really difficult for you. Although from my perspective, going to Spanish as an English native speaker is not that hard in the grand scheme of things. I think in American spheres, those kind of listicles that don't have a lot of forethought to them usually list something like Russian, with something like Chinese, something like Arabic, Japanese as the #1 spot. And yes, maybe for native English speakers, those tend to be harder, but that becomes untrue if you're from an immigrant community where that is spoken. Something else to consider if a language is going to be hard for you is the distance from your language. So for example, if you're an English speaker, Dutch might be difficult for you if it's a second language, but Russian will be harder for you if it's a second language because those two languages diverged quite a long time ago. But if you compare the Russian language to Kazakh, I think Russian is probably going to be easier for you because structurally there's more connected. Whereas with Kazakh, it's literally unknown by linguists when those two diverge, English and Kazakh. Something else to consider is the availability of resources. I talked about that in another video. Basically, languages that don't have a lot of resources are going to be tougher for you. You're going to have to get more done. You're going to have to work harder to get the same result as someone who wants to learn French or wants to learn Chinese, which has a lot of resources. And I think one of the strongest things to consider whether the language is going to be hard is your own personal motivation. Are you truly enchanted by this language? Then it's probably going to be easier for you. You don't mind that the words are so different because you like learning. But if it's a required class that you have to do for university, you'll probably want to commit seppuku. So basically, my conclusion is, don't be so quick to throw away language because you think it's going to be hard. It's really relative, and some people may tell you it's hard, but for you it's going to be super easy. Maybe you already know a language that's related, maybe you're really motivated to learn a language, and that's going to make a big difference. So those thoughtless listicles are probably going to say Chinese is #1 hardest, Russian is #1 hardest, but in reality, maybe German's going to be hardest for you because you just really don't care about German, you don't have any contact with German speakers. Maybe Thai is going to be super easy for you despite the distance from the English language because you're so interested in Thailand. So just learn what you want to learn. Don't let someone's rumor that a language is difficult stop you from actually learning it. For me, personally, in my experience, Korean was the hardest, but for you, Korean might be super easy. And you might say that Italian was the hardest for you. And that's okay, and that's valid. I think that's that on that. I feel like I'm talking too much about this topic. So what do you think? What was the hardest language for you personally? Do you think other people of the same native language will have the same experience as you? Or are you in an exceptional circumstance? Let me know in the comments below. You should follow me on my social media where I try to post every day on something like Instagram if the app is running. And on my website, I write a lot of articles, blogs about language learning which might be interesting to you. Thank you for watching. I'll see you for another video very soon, alright? So, bye bye!